You been following that Iowa girl? Yeah, I accidentally found out today, yeah. So I forgot all about it, but yeah. All right, we are live.
Okay, here we go. All right, before we get started, I have some messages here from Ligonier on CD. If you have a CD player, or if you can play it in your car. This one's The Antidote to Anxiety. Maybe the women should listen to this for their Bible study by Burke Parsons. Steve Lawson, he's always great to listen to. The Divine Helper. Sinclair Ferguson, If God Is For Us. So avail yourself of those if you like to listen to Bible teaching. All right, welcome to Renaissance Times. Because, well, I won't even make an excuse or anything. We're going to back up a little bit and talk more about Michelangelo, and in particular, the Sistine Chapel. I showed you some pictures last time, but I've done some more research because there's just so much to see there that I wanted to be able to do that. So let's ask God's blessing on our time, and then we'll begin with Michelangelo. Father, thank you for men like Michelangelo who used his talent, the talents that you had given him, and at least in part of his life, in order to bring glory to you. And we pray that that might be evident as we look at what he did, and as we consider all of those that you have gifted, whether it's during the Renaissance or today, and whether it's people that are geniuses like Michelangelo, or people who were just kind of plodding along and doing the best they can, as so many of us do. We're thankful for the gifts you've given, and may you receive honor through the use of them. And so guide us tonight. May we glorify you in what we say and do tonight. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, so Michelangelo. There's some of the information we looked at last week, including the cartoon. Let's see. And if you go to the Sistine Chapel exhibition in any city in the United States, you end up becoming an angel, as Beth did. All right, so let's see. I'm trying to see where if there's anything I have here in my notes that I didn't share with you. I think one of the things that I did tell you about was that Michelangelo's spiritual life was influenced by the reformer Savonarola, who preached against the indulgent lifestyle of priests and of the Medici family, including when they were popes. So let's go to looking at the Sistine Chapel. This doesn't include all the painting, but just imagine. I mean, this is the ceiling and all the panels that are there, and we're going to look at some of the corners and all along the sides. Just an amazing work of art that Michelangelo brought into being. And of course, it's in the Sistine Chapel in the Vatican in Rome. And his purpose in what he was doing in painting all this, so we're going to look at the details, was to present a storyline of God's grace foretold through the prophets, incarnate in Christ, and, as he believed, present in the sacraments of the church. Anybody living at that time just about would certainly give credence to that. All right, here is a chart I found of the different paintings that are part of the Sistine Chapel. So this is where you enter into the hall, and on the ceiling, no, I'm sorry, you enter in this side, this end. Where you enter in is the painting of the drunkenness of Noah. And so chronologically, this is the book of Genesis is what he's portraying. And it's a reverse chronology. Because his purpose is, when you enter in, you understand already the sinfulness of man, as he viewed the drunkenness of Noah. And then you see the flood, although that occurred. Oh yeah, that occurred before that. You had the sacrifice of Noah, which would have never been reversed. You go to original sin, banishment from the Garden of Eden. You have God creating Eve, God creating Adam. God divides water from the earth. God created the sun, moon, and planets. God divides light from the darkness. So that as you have moved through and you come to the altar, that God dividing light from darkness is above the altar. And then along the sides, and I'll explain this more, along the sides you have different prophets, and also he included what are called sibyls, which were Gentile or even pagan women who I'll talk about that later. I don't want to repeat myself. Then over here, excuse me, in sort of some triangles that are along here between these portraits are the different ancestors of Jesus. Got Jacob and Joseph up here, and I'm down, David, Solomon, Jesse down here, and so on. And then, say you got Jonah's down here. After, I think if I remember right, it took 4 years to do this. I don't know how I did 4 years. Yeah. You're gonna see. And the Pope asked him to come back and paint another section, which is the Last Judgment. And we'll see that and talk about that too. But here's a map of everything that's there. All right, now I tried to when we went to see the exhibit in Pittsburgh. I was able to get an app there that gives a tour of all the different parts of the Sistine Chapel and shows different paintings. I could not figure. I spent hours trying to figure out a way to get this where I could project it to you, and I could not find anything. So what I'm going to try is I went through. And we're going to listen to a person describing all of this. And I tried to find the pictures that went with it. And I think I've mostly gotten it. So it's going to be on my phone. And hopefully the volume will be loud enough for you to hear. All right, so let's try this.
Introduction. It's crazy to think that one of the world's most well-known pieces of art was almost blocked by its very creator. Yes, you heard that right. Michelangelo was adamantly against painting the Sistine Chapel and was most reluctant to finally accept the work, as he saw himself as more of a sculptor. From the two outstretched fingers to the monumental Last Judgment, today, you get to view the striking paintings from a 13-foot view lens, which... All right, can you imagine a guy who produced this says, that's not really the best thing I do. And he didn't want to do it because of that. Now, Clint Eastwood said, everybody's got to know his limitations. Michelangelo had no clue. What he thought were limitations were actually better than anybody else almost could do. Which is quite different from the 68-foot floor-to-ceiling view. I'm just wondering, I can speed that up a little bit. I'm going to speed it up. Tell me if it's too fast, all right? Visitors of the actual chapel are offered. This audio tour will guide you to discover Michelangelo as an artist and offer insight into each fresco. Fresco. That's a funny sounding word. Do you know what that means? Well, it's when dried pigment powder, or powdered dye, is mixed with water and immediately brushed into the freshly laid wet plaster. So the paint is actually becoming part of the building. This technique requires quick timing and leaves little room for error. Painting so high in the air proved quite difficult, as the Sistine Chapel remained open for services during the 4-plus-year project. After multiple architects failed to construct viable scaffolding on which to paint, the Pope tasked Michelangelo to invent his own form of scaffolding of flat wooden platforms laid on brackets built out from holes drilled into the walls. Also, contrary to popular belief, Michelangelo did not lie down on this scaffolding, but he was able to paint from a standing position. By the way, do you know Michelangelo's last name? Like Plato, Pele, and even Madonna. Michelangelo has become so famous, very few people knew he even had a last name. Buonarroti. We hereby invite you to plunge into the art of the Sistine Chapel, courtesy of Mr. Michelangelo Buonarroti.
How long did he say? 4 years or 40?
4 years.
4 years.
Yeah. Okay. Now, Michelangelo painted, as you know, beautiful biblical scenes and figures on the ceiling. I already said that. Okay. So there are 9 central scenes, as you can see there, that are on the ceiling, portraying key elements or moments in the book of Genesis, with a company of witnesses composed of Old Testament prophets and classical sibyls or prophetesses. So these are Jewish and Gentile seers who anticipated Christ. The Hebrew prophets foretold the coming of the Messiah to Israel. The pagan sibyls, according to the early church father Augustine, also received glimpses of truth that prepared the way for Christ within the Gentile world. And we don't hear much about that, but that was something that was a part of church tradition. The idea that God would work through both Jewish and non-Jewish, biblical and non-biblical people was in harmony with Renaissance humanist horology, which attempted to unite Christian doctrine with the philosophy of classical antiquity. Remember, we talked way back when we started the Renaissance that there was an effort to combine the Greek philosophy with biblical thinking. And so Michelangelo is kind of embracing that same idea. All right, so
I got a question.
yeah.
What's horology?
I don't know. I'm wondering whether that was a typo, because that doesn't sound right. Well, as soon as I said it, I thought that doesn't seem like the right word, but so I don't know what I was meaning there. So sorry, I'll have to think about that and come back to you. All right, so now let's look at the different prophets and sibyls.
Cumean Sibyl. Michelangelo's female figures often appear muscular and athletic, almost masculine. Here, his most masculine figure is the Cumean Sibyl. Michelangelo depicts her as an old woman and does not shy away from the disharmony of giving her a muscular upper body. According to legend, she sold the books containing her prophecies in the early 6th century BC. These books were kept in the temple of Jupiter in Rome and consulted in times of crisis. All Sibyls, like their counterparts, the biblical prophets, are shown with books and rolls of parchments as sign of their wisdom. The scrolls in the bag that the Cumean Sibyl has slung casually over her elbow also attest to her prophecies. The Cumean Sibyl was of particular significance for the Sistine Chapel. To begin with, she came from Italy. Secondly, her prophecies refer to the Della Rovere family, from which both Pope Julius II, the Sistine Chapel Pope, and his uncle, Pope Sixtus IV, originated.
And I'll try to include some close-ups when I can. Notice the detail. Yeah.
You know, like the craft thing, see on the neck and that, is that like part of what a fresco is, where is the plaster or?
Yeah, I think so.
Because I saw some on the cover, it's like, I didn't know if it was just because it was old, or if that was just the way that they turned out, because
Elizabeth?
I think it's from soul.
is, okay. But it's the plaster though, it's not.
No, well,
Like with a regular, done on regular type of,
they crackle too.
do they?
If you look close at a lot of the paintings that's above, like they're crackle, I believe that's the age.
The Erythraean Sibyl. The Erythraean Sibyl is said to have originated from the ancient city of Erythrae on the coast of the Aegean Sea in modern Turkey. Here, Michelangelo shows her as a young woman in colorful robes. As the Erythraean Sibyl is said to have made precise statements as to the coming of Christ, notice how she's leaping through a thick book while sitting serenely on her throne, awaiting this divine intervention. Also, look further to see her two attendants. The one behind sits in the shadows, rubbing the sleep from his eyes, while the other in the foreground is strongly lit, and he is using a torch to light a lamp, a symbol of divine illumination. Michelangelo's portraits of the Sibyls and prophets depict them against a painted architecture. They are seated side by side on their marble thrones in the respective alcoves.
Okay, and this is a picture of something we took there that explains some things. This tells us that Augustine referred to this particular Sibyl in his book, The City of God. Everything else is pretty much covered there.
Persian Sibyl. The Persian kingdom had a long tradition of prophecy and sorcery. Michelangelo based his depiction on the writings of the Roman author Varro from the 1st century BC, who highlighted 10 Sibyls from the mass of soothsayers and named them after their respective places of origin. As for why Michelangelo selected only these 5 for his image program, we may never know. The depiction of the Persian Sibyl can barely be described as a portrait, as she is turning away from us and her face is in the shadows and directed at a small book in her hands. We rather have the impression of witnessing a scene taken from daily life. An old woman reads, engrossed in her book. The small assisting figures are sometimes interpreted as angels and sometimes as genies, but either way, they fill in the emptiness on the left-hand side and lend the picture balance.
So I remember we got all that whole thing of balance again. Okay, now we'll come to a prophet. No, we won't.
The prophet Ezekiel.
The Delphic Sibyl. The Delphic Sibyl is smaller in comparison to the other Sibyls and prophets, and therefore appears more delicate. Here, Michelangelo portrays her as a beautiful young woman, but also with such vibrancy that she could be a real person. Her clothing is reminiscent of her Greek origins and her mythological connection. She holds a scroll, but notice how her head is turned back over her shoulder. Her mouth is slightly open and her eyes are wide in astonishment. It's as if she has just received a shocking message.
And look at these in the background. It's like there's always a couple small people in the background. And one kind of in darkness, another one in light, that seems to be something that's repeated in other places. And so, and you're gonna see this with the prophets too, that oftentimes there are these smaller images that are portraying the revelation is being given to this prophet or prophetess in this case. Any other comments about what you see here?
The small figure in shadow kind of looks like a demon. or
Yeah,
something.
I was thinking that too. I don't know if that's intentional or not, but it does. That was my first thought too. And it's interesting that the other ones we've seen so far are holding books, but she's holding a scroll. Yeah.
That
Yeah.
looks like the demon's hand is underneath it holding it up.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you're right. He's holding it for him.
There's also muscular.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe a little more dainty than the other ones, but still pretty muscular. Yeah, someone has suggested that Michelangelo really didn't know how to draw the female form. Because all his women look very muscular.
Libyan Sybil. Alongside the portraits of the 7 biblical prophets, Michelangelo also created a group of likenesses of the ancient Sibyls. Here we see the Libyan Sibyl representing Africa. Sibyls were ancient oracles who predicted the future in the ancient Greek and Roman world, sort of like ancient fortune tellers. Seeing biblical prophets and pagan soothsayers together in this manner may seem unusual to the modern observer. However, during the Renaissance, the Sibyls were a popular theme. Here, the Libyan Sibyl is to be associated with the Christian hope of salvation. Notice how the glowing colors and refined drapery prove Michelangelo's mastery of the paintbrush.
What else do you notice here? Oh, by the way, this was drawings he did to prepare to do the painting.
I practice the big toe.
Yeah.
Yeah, right here and there.
and
Yeah, why?
yeah.
Because look what he's doing here with the big toe. Well, what does that communicate, do you think? If you're sitting and you've got your foot like that, what does that indicate?
You're ready to get up and go?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
So it indicates, you know, a movement. And we got the 2 small people in the background again. Anything else?
Interesting, as amazing as he was at it, if you look at it, Perla can't possibly be like that, the way that her body's turned.
Yeah, it's pretty awkward.
Yeah, it's just. He has it like so much so good, all the folds and all the textures and all the transparency, but if you.
Your hips dislocate.
Yeah.
I don't know, but what I see is that she was sitting there with the book, and now she's turning to put the book back
Mhm.
before getting up.
Pivoting, right.
Yeah, so
He doesn't get the proportions quite right.
either that or she's picking up the book in order to bring it back to herself. I don't know.
These are all just small.
You think your feet are too small?
A little bit. Hands are bigger than
And there's somebody behind her too. You see another foot. That should, it's like.
They're intricate, that's for sure.
Lots of books.
Daniel. Okay, on the right is Daniel.
The prophet Daniel. Daniel was one of the great prophets, alongside Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel. His story is told in the Old Testament and took place around 600 BC. As a young man, Daniel was brought to the kingdom of Babylon and was renowned for his ability to interpret dreams. Michelangelo depicts almost all prophets carrying books and scrolls of parchment, referring to their spiritual work, but Daniel is the only one seen to be writing. The figure of Daniel illustrates Michelangelo's proficiency in the technique known as cangiante, a mode of painting in which changes in color are used to depict light and shade. Check out where Daniel's robe envelops his knee. It is yellow. Yet in the areas of shadow, Michelangelo shifts from yellow to green.
Yeah, that is interesting. And the use of light and darkness. And notice his foot back here is in darkness, you know, the shadow there. And this has two, I guess I'm gonna call them imps. I don't know what else, you know, maybe that's not the right word, but. You know, we have two here too, but one is holding the book that in which he's writing. I don't see the writing
That's
part.
what I was trying to figure
I
out
don't
too.
Maybe it's outside of the frame, looks like maybe it's sin. the rest
And
of
then
it,
there's one
yeah.
behind it too.
Yeah.
But maybe indicating again that he's getting revelation from God, of what he is writing.
Where is it right here?
Yeah, it looks like it's,
Out of the box. I think.
It's
This
cropped
is-
out.
it may be,
I can see it's written. I think it's cropped out of the picture.
Yeah.
sorry about that.
Going off.
Oh, that's the one back there? I think so.
Yeah, I don't have anything about Jeremiah, so I just look at Jeremiah. What's his attitude?
Thinking.
And he's thinking, what's his mood as he's thinking? Yeah, and Jeremiah was, he's known as the weeping prophet. He wrote the book of Lamentations. That could give you an idea of what his mood was like concerning what the judgment coming upon Judah. Now, there are two figures in his too, but they're not little imps. They're more adult looking. Not sure what the significance of that might be. And you don't see, he must have boots on or something, because you don't see the toes or anything. And it seems to be covered. Maybe that indicates getting ready to travel. Oh, wait a minute, I do have Jeremiah.
Prophet Jeremiah. This final painting in the prophet cycle is a portrait of Jeremiah. He is the only prophet to be shown completely buried in his thoughts. Whereas the others are moved by the divine message or are concentrating on the written word, the figure of Jeremiah seems resigned and almost exhausted. Notice how the accompanying figures echo the sorrow and pain of the prophet. The unusually expressive and detailed presentation may also be attributed to the fact that Michelangelo identified strongly with Jeremiah as a person. The biblical prophet is even rumored to be a portrait of Michelangelo. What do you think?
I was just thinking that too. I haven't listened to all these because I just didn't have time. But I was just thinking of looking at his nose and stuff. It kind of looks like Michelangelo. Wonder if he painted himself as the prophet Jeremiah.
prophet Isaiah. But he was wounded for our transgressions, he was bruised for our iniquities, and with his stripes we are healed. This verse is taken from the book of the Isaiah in the Old Testament. Here, he prophesied the death of the future Redeemer on the cross. It is no coincidence, then, that Michelangelo painted the prophet Isaiah under the fresco Sacrifice of Noah, as this work also refers to the sacrifice of Christ. Notice Isaiah's fingers wedged in the book. This is to allude to the fact that he has just awoken from his slumber, and his attention is drawn to the small figures which scholars believe represent the bearer of God's message. This means we are seeing Isaiah at the exact moment he hears news from God.
And notice his toes. And anything else that you notice there? I didn't point this out to you, but you probably figured out this is where that comes in the whole ceiling thing.
The prophet Ezekiel. The priest and prophet Ezekiel lived in the early 6th century BC, when the Israelites were living in exile in Babylon following the conquest of Jerusalem. Ezekiel, however, prophesied not only the defeat of the enemy, but also the reconstruction of.
Sometimes people don't know how to pronounce words correctly. Yeah. It's not prophesied, it's prophesied.
Jerusalem and the kingdom of God. Notice how Ezekiel remains seated, but nonetheless, Michelangelo paints him in motion. He is turning to his right, focusing his attention to the figure standing behind his throne. This figure points upwards, the direction from which Ezekiel is receiving the message from God. As is often the case in Michelangelo's paintings, when you see a pointing finger, something is about to happen. In the paintings of the Genesis cycle, fingers bore witness to the creative power of God.
I think one thing, I think this was the painting that, as Beth and I were looking at them, we thought, apparently, it looks like he has water retention problems. His ankles are really swollen, there's circulation problem issues. Any other comments there? This is part of like a scarf that he's wearing. Either the wind's blowing or he's moving. Moving pretty fast, you know, being seated.
Character he's looking at looks like a female, whereas to me the others all looks like male.
Look like boys. Yeah.
Prophet Joel. While very little is known about the prophet Joel, we do know that he foretold of a divine punishment in the form of an army. So it does seem reasonable to interpret this as a plague of locusts sent by God. As the book of Joel states, the field is wasted, the land mourneth, the new wine is dried up, even all the trees of the field are withered. But fear not, O land, be glad and rejoice, for the Lord will do great things. In the chapel, the portrait of Joel is placed alongside the painting of Noah, who was also involved in the cultivation of the soil, as he was the first man to grow wine, which Michelangelo explores further in the fresco, The Drunkenness of Noah. Here, the depiction of Joel appears to be more of a realistic portrait. Notice the lines on his forehead, his knitted eyebrows, and the small creases around his eyes. The use of light in this picture is striking. See how it shines on his forehead, as if to emphasize Joel's mind as the place of divine vision.
Any comments there? Or observations?
Prophet Zechariah. Directly above the chapel's entrance is the portrait of the prophet Zechariah. Zechariah had numerous visions where he foresaw the events of Palm Sunday. As Jesus so entered into Jerusalem, here the faithful enter into the Sistine Chapel. It is believed that Michelangelo did not paint all of the prophets and sibyls at the same time. Rather, these figures show the development of Michelangelo as a painter. The figure of Zechariah occupies a special place in this development. Notice the complex pose and how Zechariah appears to be lit from the upper left-hand side so that his body casts a notable shadow on the wall. Light is often understood to be the Spirit of God, and here, as it is shining on the book, it attests to the divine message relayed by this prophet.
Also, the shadow on his face indicates light coming from behind. Any other observations? Yeah. Yeah, I thought maybe they were going to tell us when he may have painted this in relationship to the others. If it was towards the end, maybe he had a lot of orange left over, and I got to use up this orange. Yeah.
Prophet Jonah. Directly above the chapel altar stands this image of a young athletic man, the prophet Jonah. You may know Jonah as the guy who got swallowed by a whale. His gaze is directed upwards towards the figure of God in the scene of the separation of light and darkness. Michelangelo seems to be showing us the communication between God and his prophet. The placement of the image of Jonah above the altar therefore appears purposeful, as every Mass is reminiscent of the Last Supper and the sacrifice of Christ. Michelangelo's Jonah is placed above the representation of the Last Judgment, since Jonah announces this divine judgment at the end of time.
Okay, again, we have two other figures there. And a fish. So I read a comment by somebody that this appears to be more like a fish that Michelangelo would have seen down at the market rather than the fish that swallowed Jonah, but he wouldn't have had enough room to put that size of a fish. Sure, I got them all. I think I did.
But I bet most of the kids in that other room would be able to tell you which prophet that was.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Alternating between the prophets and the sibyls are the ancestors of Christ recorded in the first chapter of Matthew.
Asa. Here we have Asa. He was the third king of Judah and reigned between 913 and 873 BC. The Bible tells us that while Asa's father Abijah and grandfather Rehoboam, who Michelangelo also included in the lineage cycle, had done great evil in the sight of God, Asa turned things around for the legacy of his family. He built up the fortified cities, deposed his grandmother from her position as the Queen Mother for her role in the corrupt affairs of the palace, and ultimately led his kingdom into 40 years of great prosperity. The Bible even says Asa's heart was fully committed to the Lord all his life. Great job, King Asa. Look at you, breaking those generational curses. You won't be surprised to see that Michelangelo decided against a traditional ancestral portrait. Instead, he shows a scene of a small family probably an account of the king's childhood.
And notice that these are prophets on either side of him, so the ancestors are in these little triangular sections between the prophets and the sibyls. Any other observations?
The ancestors of Christ, Jesse. Between the portraits of the sibyls and the prophets are depictions of the lineage of Christ. Their identity and significance have always been a matter of great debate, but this portrait is believed to be Jesse, also known as Yeshai. He was the father of David. Spoiler alert, David kills a giant. But Jesse was descended from Shem, the son of Noah. We meet Shem in the drunkenness of Noah fresco. Interestingly, the central figure in this piece is not the male ancestor of Christ, but a female figure looking pensively out of the picture. Her pose, with her hand resting on her chin, is reminiscent of a famous motif used by artists to express melancholy. In fact, virtually all figures in the lineage cycle show this prevailing melancholic mood.
So I guess I'm not sure who this is, but apparently Jesse is back there.
The ancestors of Christ, Rehoboam. Rehoboam was the son of wise King Solomon and the grandson of King David, the most significant leaders of the Israelites. During his 17-year reign, from 932 to 915 BC, the kingdom split into a northern and a southern territory. Here again, Michelangelo does not portray the ancestor of Christ as an individual portrait. Instead, we see a small child held protectively in his mother's arms. The brilliant colors of her robe and her lavish braids contrast against the gloomy underlying mood of this family scene. The figure of the father is discernible as a mere haze in the background.
Isn't that interesting? Again, it goes against what you would think if you're painting portraits of ancestors of Jesus. You would think that the predominant person in the portrait would be the ancestor, but it's just the child here. The mother is predominant, and King Solomon is back here in the background. I wish I could tell you why.
The ancestors of Christ, Uzziah.
I don't know why. There's some of these portraits that are not available. I mean, you can find everything online. I could not find. I looked and looked and looked to try to find Hezekiah. No, see, I'm on the wrong one now. Let's see. And I could not find one anywhere. And why did I want to be? Maybe it's because it doesn't. Oh no, there it is. He's called Ezekias in these portraits, but it's what we know is Hezekiah. So if you want to see it here,
Hezekiah. Hezekiah was a king of Judah. Just 25 when he came into power, he immediately went to work cleaning house. Pagan altars, idols, and temples were destroyed, including the bronze snake statue Moses made in the desert. During his reign, the dominant world power Assyria invaded Judah, threatening to take control of Jerusalem. But Hezekiah, who put God first in everything he did, sent word to the prophet Isaiah asking for aid from God and seeking counsel. And God kept his promise to protect Jerusalem. In fact, the Bible says that one night the angel of the Lord went out into the Assyrian camp and put 185,000 soldiers to death. When the rest of the Assyrian army woke up the next morning and saw all the dead bodies, well, they got the heck out of Dodge. But here, instead of seeing King Hezekiah in battle against the massing hordes, we see him as a small child, nuzzling up to his father in an outpouring of childlike trust, while his mother is in the foreground, casting a troubled glance towards the young child.
Yeah, so again, the mother has the prominent place, and then Hezekiah, the child, is looking at his mother, but is really snuggling up next to his father, who was an evil king. I just knew that Dan was gonna find a picture. Probably an hour or so, thing less looking. Oh, I don't know who this is. Oh, there it is. Josiah, remember, was the boy king.
The ancestors of Christ, Josiah. Josiah, also known as Yoshiyahu, was king of Judah between 640 and 609 BC. Known as one of the world's youngest kings, he ascended to the throne at the age of only 8 after the assassination of his father. During his reign, Josiah called for a time of national repentance and did what was right in the eyes of the Lord. But ultimately, Josiah himself died in the battle against the Egyptian pharaoh Necho and was buried in Jerusalem. Like other images in the lineage cycle, Michelangelo chooses to highlight a scene from Josiah's family life rather than depicting the king at battle. In doing this, he continues to point towards the Old Testament reflections of the Holy Family of Mary, Joseph, and the Christ child.
So I guess maybe that's a reason that they finally have come up with it here, that he is wanting to remind us of the family of Joseph, Mary, and Jesus, because he's depicting all these kings as children with the parents. If you want to find out more about Rehoboam, Josiah, and so on, I just recently completed an episode on discovering his story that covers that time period. Some very interesting things occurred there. Okay. And this is not a fish.
The ancestors of Christ, Salmon. In these depictions of Christ's lineage, Michelangelo illustrates general everyday scenes. Here, this family group fits perfectly into the triangular field and appears linked by the focusing on the cutting of the cloth. The young boy is Solomon, yet another king from the house of David. Solomon is not mentioned in the Old Testament. It is only when Matthew and Luke put forth Jesus' genealogy in the New Testament that we see this man, the one who married Rahab, a prostitute, back in the book of Joshua. We know the story of Rahab, the harlot who hid Israel's spies before the Battle of Jericho. She and her family were the only ones spared when Joshua and his army poured into Jericho in one of Israel's first and biggest conquests. We don't know much about the story of Solomon, but we know enough. For instance, we know he had the courage to accept someone outside of the Hebrew people. He not only accepted Rahab as one of his own, he married her. When others saw a prostitute, Solomon saw a woman of courage. When others saw Rahab as an outsider, Solomon saw a hero for his fledgling people.
Okay, any observations there? I seem to have missed one. Zerubbabel. So we'll just skip him and go now to the ceiling itself, which is covering Genesis. There are 9 scenes, which all make symbolic reference to Christ's death and or resurrection, that are grouped into 3 triads and appear in reverse chronological order as one proceeds through the chapel. Where one enters, there appears the drunkenness of Noah. And then one walks back through the book of Genesis to find that above the altar is seen the picture of eternity. All of the figures surrounding the ceiling are visually and theologically connected to the 9 central scenes by the illusion of a single light source, not the natural light from the windows along the chapel's side walls, but emanating from the scene of God, separating light from darkness directly above the altar. So this is the drunkenness of Noah.
Drunkenness of Noah. The drunkenness of Noah is our first scene from Genesis, the first book of the Bible. From the creation of earth and man to the banishment of Adam and Eve from paradise, Genesis tells us the story of God's own creation heading toward ruin and needing rescuing right from the beginning of it all. This panel shows the drunkenness of Noah, one of the biblical forefathers. Noah was saved from the flood because of his steadfast faith. In this picture, however, Noah is intoxicated. Michelangelo drew inspiration from the biblical account in which Noah was the first man to grow wine. Cheers to Noah. After consuming his own wine, he became intoxicated and lay down unclothed in his tent. We've all been there before, right? In the center of the composition is the naked Noah. His head with a graying beard is slumped onto his chest and his eyes are closed. Next to him, we see his 3 sons, Japheth, Ham, and Shem. Ham in the middle points in the direction of his father, shaming him. His brothers rush to the scene from behind. Shem arrives and tries to hold Ham back, while the 3rd brother, Japheth, covers his father's nakedness with a blue cloth. But the significance of the illustration of drunken Noah was far beyond the story itself. The shaming of Noah by his son Ham was a prelude, or prefiguration, to the shaming of Christ. The drunken Noah symbolizes God's creation, mankind, and its continuous return to sinful ways.
Okay, what else do you see there?
They're working in the background.
Yeah, well, who's left? Who does that have to be? It's gotta be one of the women. So if the men have been working instead of, or Noah had been working. What I find interesting is, the whole thing is about Noah being naked and Ham, and they're all naked. So what's the big deal here? You can see, I assume this must be the jug of wine there. This looks like the ark in the background, I guess, is that what, or is that, that looks like a big tub maybe, I don't know. What do you think? All right, here's pictures of the flood.
The great flood. And God said unto Noah, make thee an ark of gopher wood, for I will cause it to rain upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights, and every living substance that I have made will I destroy from off the face of the earth. Genesis 7:4. While this fresco contains the most figures of any on the Sistine Chapel ceiling by far, it is interesting to note that the drama of the scene does not stem from the natural disaster. It is not the rescuing ark that stands in the foreground, but the futile escape of humankind. Look around. We see people rushing for the hillside, a figure in the boat striking out with a club to prevent another figure from climbing on board, others clinging fearfully to their loved ones. But look further, and we are able to witness the selfless acts of human closeness and the willingness to help. An old man pulling a lifelessly slumped, much younger man out of the water as others stand with their arms outstretched to assist the pair is extremely powerful and reminds us to show compassion for our neighbors. Only in the far off background does Michelangelo hint at the ultimately happy outcome to the story. There we can see the ark, which Noah built at the instruction from God, who is symbolized by the white dove.
All right, so in this rendition, there's a little platform around the ark that people are climbing up on, apparently. But primarily it's looking at people trying to escape the judgment of God and the judgment of God coming upon them. You know, anybody ever seen that in a nursery wall, painting of Noah's Ark? All the people trying to escape drowning? No. And although his ark isn't totally realistic, it's more realistic than most of the ones you see in children's storybooks and on bedroom walls. And this is a close-up of what's over here. Any comments or observations?
The creation of Eve. Well, 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 would you look at that? It's not the creation of Adam at the central point of the Genesis cycle. It's Eve. Here, in the creation of Eve, Adam leans slumped over a tree stump while Eve steps forth from the shadowy corner to reach out to her creator.
She's coming
Her
right
right
inside.
heel is placed behind Adam's chest. Michelangelo's nod to Eve's creation from Adam's rib. And although she brought original sin into the world, she is also the mother of all the living. So maybe we go easy on her. Maybe Michelangelo knew what he was doing when he placed this at the center of the papal chapel. What's fascinating about this painting is it marks the first appearance of the figure of God. It's the only time we see him standing on the ground. Michelangelo portrays him as fatherly and dignified. His expansive form fills the right side of the picture, standing about 2 meters in height. That's just 1 inch taller than Michael Jordan and just a couple inches shorter than LeBron James. Eve is stretching out to God almost as if she wants to touch the hem of his robe, but there is no physical contact. Eve's eyes still appear as dark, empty holes with no soul behind them yet, but God's glance is directed toward her face, ready to breathe life into her.
All right, any observations there? I don't know if you figured, but some of these pictures are pictures we took and some I had to look online to find. And the most famous of all, probably.
Creation of Adam. Hardly any other work of art has marked our collective memory as strongly as Michelangelo's interpretation of the creation of Adam. This scene has been reproduced thousands of times on mugs, magnets, movie posters, calendars, music videos, screensavers, and trucker hats all over the world, and in the gift shop right now. Even a tiny fragment of the whole image is enough to summon the entire work in our mind. But why? Perhaps it is because Michelangelo was able to create an intimate yet powerful portrait of God. Here we see 2 figures, God on the right and Adam on the left. God is depicted as an elderly yet muscular man with gray hair and a long beard, which sweep back with the movement of flight. Rather than wearing a royal garment and depicted as an all-powerful ruler, he wears a light tunic, leaving much of his arms and legs exposed. God is shown in a state that is not untouchable and remote from man, but one which is accessible to him. Adam is depicted as a lounging figure who responds to God's imminent touch, a touch that will not only give life to Adam, but give life to all mankind. We can see the nude, athletic Adam in a suggested hilly landscape with a pose that mirrors that of his creator. However, whereas God is emerging from a celestial plane, Adam wholly belongs to the earth. While the birth of man is seen as a simple gesture, there is nothing simple here. Michelangelo's masterful composition draws our attention to the divine moment and captures the power and intimacy between creator and creation. Before you go, look closely. Who is the female figure next to God? Given her privileged placement under the arm of God, she is presumably an important one. Is this woman Eve, the future wife of Adam, waiting to the side until she is created out of Adam's rib? Or is it possible she was the Virgin Mary taking a place of honor next to God? If this is true, is the child next to her the Christ child? Look at God's finger on the child. Perhaps this is Michelangelo's way of linking the creation of Adam to the future coming of Christ, who comes to reconcile man after the sin of Adam. Scholars have widely debated who she might be. What do you think?
Yeah, there's several beats there, and I think we've got part of this is cut off there, but here's a leg, here's a face here, there, face is back there. Not sure what it all means. Any comments there?
Oh, this is on the Sistine Chapel. Soon.
Yep,
Wow.
and more. I haven't shown you everything. Okay, let's see. Next is, as we're moving towards the altar, come to this creation of the sun, moon, and planets. Oh, wait a minute. I was gonna, let me go back. There's one thing, I don't know if you ever thought about this, something unusual about the creation of Adam. And that is that Adam appears to be alive before God has endowed him with life. You know, Adam's not just laying there. He seems to be alive. So is there something else going on? There's a lot of speculation about that too. Perhaps Michelangelo was attempting to display not just the physical creation of Adam, but the creation of Adam as it means to be created in the image of God. Someone said, therefore, instead of showing the moment when God forms Adam's body out of the dirt, Michelangelo shows God giving Adam the spirit of his creativity. God creates man before the fall, not as a toiler, but as a creative being. And that certainly would conform to the ideas of Michelangelo.
Of the sun, moon, and planets. And God said, let there be lights. And God made two great lights.
Okay, so remember, we've entered the chapel from this direction. The drunkenness of Noah is here and progressed on through. And now we're coming towards the end of the ceiling where the altar is.
The greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night. Genesis chapter 1, verses 14 to 16. This is how the Bible describes the creation of the sun, moon, and planets, shown here. On the right side of the painting, we see God creating the sun to the left and the moon to the right in a single gesture. The figure at the rear right-hand side of God is holding his arm in front of his eyes, shielding them from the sun's rays. To his left, a small attendant drapes himself in a shawl to guard against the cold of night. Michelangelo was a master of using color and shape to tell his stories. Notice the sweeping circular brush strokes of the sun versus the more quick short strokes of the plants. The whole scene seems to come to life. The way he has captured the wind upon the robes conveys action and a sense of purpose. The flowing beard and hair couples with a look of determination and concentration on God's face on the right side of the painting. On the opposite side of the painting, we can once again see the form of God from behind. Where is he going? No time for stopping. He's got things to do, more to create.
Any observations?
You had to put that all on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. Yeah, it'd be really fantastic painting.
Yeah. For sure.
Yeah, all planned out.
God separates the earth from the waters.
Yeah, I mean, that's another point. Yeah, he had to plan all this out. It wasn't like he just started at one end. I mean, when you and I paint a room, we start at one end and we paint it till it gets done. I mean, he has to have that all planned out. before he ever started.
In
In the beginning,
Yeah.
God created.
How do they've been here, Mac, how can they see all that high up, do they have, you can walk around?
No, I don't, no, you can, I mean, all, you can see it from, I don't know, what is it, 60 feet, or I'm not sure how far away it is. So that's why, I think I mentioned last week when we were at the exhibit over in Pittsburgh, I heard somebody talking who had been to the Sistine Chapel, and they said, this is much better than being in the chapel because I can see close up what I couldn't see over there.
In this image, we see God surging forth from the surface of the painting. God's powerfully outspread hands command his creation. The three paintings depict him as a dynamic and original force. There are disputes as to which part of creation is shown here. The separation of the sky and earth? Maybe it's the split of heaven and the waters. Or maybe it's the creation of the creatures of the sea? Scholars have debated the issue tirelessly, but what do you see?
Okay, any comments there? Yeah, that's what it may be. What they look like. Let's see.
The separation of light from darkness. Michelangelo chose the first act of creation as the last painting in his Genesis cycle. To represent the separation of light and darkness, Michelangelo devised an entirely new composition. He shows the figure of God from below, suspended in front of a diffused background. When he did this, he broke all the traditional rules of his time in regards to representation and perception. Trailblazer. The theological significance of this first act of creation can be seen as a reference to the Last Judgment. In both, there is a separation of two opposing principles. The light corresponds to the chosen, and the darkness to those damned by the judgment of God.
So if you follow what he's saying here, this on one end of the chapel on the ceiling is God separating light from darkness. On the extreme other end, beyond the ceiling itself, is a section that portrays the Last Judgment, which is also separating light from darkness on his people. Any comments there? Oh. I missed another one. I missed the expulsion from the garden. Oh, I missed the sacrifice of Noah. Well, sorry about that. There's so many hours in a day. All right, so that's not all. In between all these things, there are corners. And he put different paintings in the corners. This is the first, or one of the corners.
Alive. Now this story is fun. The book of Samuel tells us that the Israelites and Philistines had been engaged in bitter conflict for years when Goliath, a giant, demanded the Israelites appoint a man to fight against him in single combat. While scholars debate the actual height of Goliath, many agree he was somewhere around 3 meters or 9 feet 6 inches. That's a big guy. But regardless of the giant's precise height, we know he was a formidable opponent. Not only was he tall, he was strong. His bronze armor alone weighed 125 pounds. So it's safe to say the Israelites needed to send in the best of the best. Enter David, a young, simple shepherd boy armed with a sling and a few pebbles. Why are we sending David again? In the ultimate underdog story, David defeated Goliath through his courage, cleverness, and with God's help. Here, Michelangelo shows David in the moment of his triumph over Goliath. David holds his sword over Goliath's body in preparation to seal the Philistines' fate by taking his head. In the corner, we see the soldiers witnessing the victory of Israelites over the Philistines.
As you see, here's the ceiling, the prophets and the sibyls, and now here's a corner. The corner here and a corner there. So each corner has a painting. And you could probably write a book on his choice of why he put these in the corners.
In the Old Testament. While the title of the painting points towards the outcome, Michelangelo actually tells us the full story of what led to Haman's disciplining. In the book of Esther, Haman is introduced as an enemy of a man named Mordecai and the Jewish people. Seeking a way to destroy every Jew, Haman used a connection with King Ahasuerus to order their extermination. But he didn't take into account one seriously fierce woman, Esther, the Jewish wife of the king. Esther realized that to save her people, she would need to go before the king and plead for them. This was a dangerous thing to do because no one was to go
You know the
before
story. I'm
king without
gonna
already
go ahead.
knows his fate. On the right, we can see the enraged king, his outstretched finger sending Haman to summon Mordecai, the uncle of Esther, to him. Mordecai is to become the next highest government official, and Haman's vile behavior is to be punished by death. The punishment of Haman is shown in the center.
Okay, I don't know if you can see, this looks like maybe it's not the cross exactly, but the wooden structure upon which Haman is executed. He may have been impaled. Not sure what other words are used there. Any other insights? And you can see, here's what the corner looks like in comparison with what's around it. Next is the story of Judith, who drives a peg through the head of Sisera, what I know him as.
Twice in the neck as hard as she could, chopping off his head. This is a dramatic account in the Bible of the story of Judith and Holofernes.
Oh, no,
The tale recounts how Nebuchadnezzar II,
a different
king
one.
of Mesopotamia, sent his general Holofernes to conquer areas of the Middle East, including the city of Bethulia. The inhabitants were on the verge of surrendering when the beautiful widow Judith and her maid visited the enemy's camp and sought out the tent of the general Holofernes. Holofernes, struck by her beauty, attempted to seduce Judith.
I think this comes from one of the books of the Apocrypha.
Literally slayed.
Not in our Bible.
We see here the moment directly following the beheading. Judith and her maid are sneaking back out of the camp unnoticed. Michelangelo tells the story without ever allowing us to see.
That's not spaghetti and meatballs. That's just head.
Back to us. The face of her attendant is half hidden by her upraised arms. The watchman at the left.
Okay, so let's get the last corner here.
Brazen serpent. Here we see Michelangelo's divine hand at work in the corners of the vault. Each corner depicts the rescue of the people of Israel from various situations of dire need and refers to the saving of mankind by Jesus Christ. Brilliant. In this painting, he shows an event from the book of Numbers. Led by Moses, the Israelites left Egypt for the promised land, but first wandered the desert for 40 years. 40 years, exhausted from such great exertion, the people of Israel became impatient and ungrateful. This angered God, who sent poisonous snakes in punishment. On one side, Michelangelo depicts the Israelites' struggle with the snakes. You see the muddled snarl of bodies in warped poses and with fear-laden faces. God wasn't messing around. But if you look closely, in the background, slightly off-center, we see a sign of God's mercy, the brazen serpent. Numbers recounts how Moses was commanded by God to build a bronze statue of a snake that had the power to heal and protect. On the other side of the painting, Michelangelo depicts the repenting faithful turning to the image of the bronze serpent. In the foreground, we see a female figure that has fallen to her knees following a bite from the venomous snakes. Her attendant is holding her and is directing her arm, on which the bite mark can clearly be seen towards the statue. As you might have put together by now, the painting refers to the separation of the saved and the condemned at the last judgment. On the right, we can see the consequences of disobeying God, and on the left, the redemption of the righteous.
Okay, that is the sealing of the Sistine Chapel. But we haven't seen the last thing he painted, which was the Last Judgment. So we'll look at that next week. Any observations here before we shut it down? All right. Hopefully gain an appreciation for what Michelangelo was able to accomplish.